Is up, everyone? It is Friday. This is the Traded Black podcast here on the Benzinga Television Network. I'm your host, Shad Dales. I hope you all had a great week. We just got back from New York City, attended a prominent cannabis and psychedelic conference, and spoke to some pretty influential people about what else? The rescheduling announcement with the DEA and when it potentially could happen. So there's a lot to unpack. And that is the main reason why we should listen to this podcast today as to when we think that timeline could happen. So let's jump right into it. Welcome in TDR, lead financial writer, Benjamin A. Smith. Hope you had a good week and good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you guys. I hear you had a productive New York trip, so looking forward to hear about that.
Anthony Verrill, good to see you. Saw you at the airport this morning at LaGuardia, and now we're back to virtual life. How was the flight home?
It was great. I'm glad to be home and overall successful trip.
I came down about 50 feet from the ground. Pilot put on the freaking jets and we went right back up in the clouds. I'm not going to lie. I was kind of never seen or felt or experienced that before when you're just about to land. But the winds were crazy. But needless to say, I'm alive and well, and here we are. But what a week it was. As I said off the top, we are in New York City. So I guess, Anthony, let's begin with that. We'll dive into it. This segment is called Into the Wire, where we highlight all the biggest headlines in the cannabis space over the past week. Before we get in, all views of the Traded Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or guests as investment advice, and the views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and not investment advice. Very important. So we wrapped up the 3-day business trip in NYC. We attended a prominent cannabis and psychedelic conference, and needless to say, the topic of conversation was the DEA's announcement concerning rescheduling. We spoke to some influential people while we were there, Anthony, and the big takeaway I received was that rescheduling is going to happen, and it could happen end of Q1 2024 or perhaps early Q2 2024. So first off, who did you speak with, Anthony, and do you believe that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, Noah brought out a pretty engaged and authoritative audience. I mean, I was speaking to everybody from lobbyists that are directly in DC right now drafting legislation as it relates to this, working with key senators and members of government, family offices. There were some hedge fund managers there, and there were also some industry people that was there. The sentiment was very positive. I mean, everyone firmly does believe, and these are all insiders with connections, that Schedule 3 is coming. However, everybody had their own view on time frame. I heard as late as the end of Q2, end of Q1, end of the year. I think the timing is as good as anybody's guess. Obviously, we've heard from a lot of the CEOs on these earnings calls that they're expecting a announcement from the DEA by year's end. That would be great. I've been cautiously optimistic and said that there's an above average chance that happens, but I'm sticking to my guns that we get it sometime before March or the end of Q1 of next year. So, yeah. I mean, that's what I've been saying for a while, and that's what I'm definitely sticking to.
Yeah, good point.
So that 90-day timeline that has been floating around,
that was fallacy. That was fallacy. I called it a while ago that was not fact. That's not fact. The DEA does not have to respond within 90 days.
Okay.
That is a fallacy.
It's amazing how that, even though some people have refuted that, I know you've done that on Twitter as well, it's going around and people largely believe that, or a large segment of investors believe that.
It's a nice thing to believe. It's a nice thing to believe. I mean, if you really are of the school of thought that there is some 90-day timeline that's out there that the DEA has to respond to, we're sitting in that sweet spot where I think we're about 10 days away from that 90-day window elapsing. If I wanted to form my own opinion and think that was fact, it'd be nice. But I don't think that we get something by the 27th of November.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving's next week. Politicians are, and the DEA is not going to be in office.
Yeah. And then you segue into the month of December, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff that we learned, but for the most part, I think one positive sign as well, not to sit here and say that anything we just mentioned about was negative, but it's great. But we were speaking to a couple of lobbyists, don't know how accurate it is, but they strongly believe that they think 280E rescheduling and safe banking could happen and should happen before the next election, which really grabbed my attention. It's going to take some time, But interesting to say that if that were to happen, if it does, wow, it'll be incredible, obviously, for this industry.
Well, yeah, Schedule 3 repeals 280 overnight.
Yeah.
So with the Schedule 3 announcement, 280 is gone.
Yeah.
As 280 is heavily predicated on the Schedule 1 status of the drugs. And then it'd be nice that safe would be icing on the cake. And then if we get any FinCEN movement with what Elizabeth Warren went with earlier in the week, that'd be fantastic. That'd be a triple threat. That'd be best case scenario.
Yeah. That's for sure. Lots we learned too on how the landscape in Washington goes towards this industry. There's a lot of stuff that is beyond our wildest imaginations as to like what's involved, but there's so many moving parts to this. It's not just one dimensional, and they got to have a lot of ways get stuff done incrementally. But to get stuff done incrementally, you have to look almost at a comprehensive point of view. But lots we learned, to say the least. But it was a good 3 days, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, the thing that my main takeaway from speaking with the lobbyist that we were speaking to, who from the looks of it is pretty connected in Washington, is that they actually draft legislation not with the they don't solely draft a legislation in hopes of getting it passed. They draft a legislation so it goes on to certain politicians' desks and it gets the wheels spinning, and it gives them some sort of framework as to progress current bills, influence future bills. They draft legislation to influence, not necessarily to get passed. Which we've seen with things like the Climate Act, with things like the CARE Act. We've seen several pieces of legislation that are out there that we see at face value. We think, well, that doesn't really have a chance of passing. Truth be told, it doesn't necessarily need to pass. It's meant there to get the wheel spinning and influence the politicians that are reading it. If for reasons unbeknownst, they wouldn't be thinking about cannabis in the first place.
One of the things we learned too, Ben, is that, you know, as much as like we're trying to get legalization for cannabis, rescheduling needs to be walked before we run, because even from a business aspect, we really have to get down to like, you know, the nuts and bolts of this and making sure that we're fully prepared, because they don't want to roll out across the country, similar to what happened in New York, which is why it's taking a little bit more time. But I think that's a smart move, making sure that this is set up the right way, needless to say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, a lot of people don't realize how many moving parts there is that goes into these bills, and they think, well, why don't they just, you know, politicians just pass it and then it gets magically done overnight? A lot of different things that go into this, and inputs and so forth. So yeah, that last thing we need is like another disaster, which was New York, which finally they're starting to remedy the whole situation by allowing, you know, bigger MSOs to compete in the marketplace.
Yeah. So we were gone all week. Did you throw a party like Tom Cruise did back at the house in the movie Risky Business all week while we were gone?
I personally could not. That would have been nice. I don't think my wife would have bought into that. So I kind of laid low, put my head down, and still.
That's a very good answer.
risky business.
1983. I'm showing my age. That's a classic. Okay, well, let's jump in to some of the announcements while we were away. Canopy Growth announced that the Ontario Court of Justice has approved 2 transactions to sell all or substantially all the assets of BioSteel Canada and BioSteel. So, Ben, break it down on what this means, I guess, for Canopy Growth moving forward.
Yeah, basically it means that BioSteel Canada and BioSteel Manufacturing LLC, 2 assets that they owned, are going through the court, and the court has approved the sale of those assets. So bottom line is that they are divesting 2 cash losing money sinks that have been on their books for a long time. And that's one of the big problems that have been contributing to their bad balance sheet and their bad earnings. For example, court records showed that BioSteel was burning through $15 million in cash every month. So that's $45 million a quarter.
Yes. And you're talking, yeah, that's crazy.
Hey, where is that money going? What do you mean 15 million towards what?
I'm assuming I'm assuming sponsorships. I'm assuming marketing money.
That's right.
They were just lighting it on fire.
They're all over the NBA for sure.
That's right. Well, think about it. Even though sales were actually growing.
I thought BioSteel was I thought it was NHL.
I've seen them courtside at Laker games. I know they're all over the NBA team in Toronto with the Raptors. Big time.
That's been
That's-
But
$10.
whatever the case is, even and sales were actually growing for this product, but the sponsorship deals, and Anthony hit it on the head, the incredible amount of money that it takes to get these big name players on board and sell this product is massive. I mean, if you're LeBron James, well, I don't know if they have LeBron James, but if you're a tier 1 NBA player, tier 1 hockey player, you're not gonna pitch this product for $200,000. It's gonna take a multi-million-dollar long-term contract.
The thing that's frustrating, I've heard the product's good.
It's very
I've
good.
actually heard it's a good. Yeah,
it's extremely good, and
that's
it's
what's
not
frustrating to me.
It's not just a male athlete like demographic. This hits all kinds of like my wife, her friends. Like it's a very good product. But to your point, Ben, some of the marketing and branding that they've done does not come at a cheap price tag when you think about, and they're all over the NBA and they're all over the NHL, as you said too.
The sad thing is, if they would have, perhaps developed this product and hung on to it, maybe it would have eventually became into something that turned into a moneymaker for them. But at the current state of the way where Canopy is right now, I think it was best for them to divest this and help their balance sheet as they restructure. So while I don't think this is going to solve all of Canopy's problems, because they're in the middle of a restructuring process and they're trying to clean that up and trying to reduce cash burn, it's definitely going to help. It's again $45 million a quarter. That's what came out in the court filings, and that some quarters that was probably between 40 and 60% of their net cash loss.
I mean, $180 million on that business unit is crazy.
Ben, think about this. In 1999, Air Canada put the naming rights for the Toronto Maple Leafs play at a 20-year deal worth $40 million. I worked on a deal at MLSE in 2018 for a 20-year deal with Scotiabank, and that 20-year deal, $800 million. $800 million.
Yeah,
so,
the inflation,
times have
along
changed.
with price tags for teams and so forth. Like you could have bought the Yankees. I think George Steinbrenner bought the Yankees in like 1971 or 2. Don't quote me on the year, for like $7.5 million or something like that.
Oh, dude, you should see what Al Davis bought the Raiders for back in the day. I think it was like less than $1 million.
We were talking about Tom Gores, who owns the Detroit Pistons this week, Anthony, that runs Platinum Equity.
Yeah.
And he bought that NBA franchise from the late Bill Davidson, his wife, back, I forget what year, 2010, for $300 million. Look at the average NBA franchise now. They're going for $2-3 billion. But Jerry Jones was losing $1 million a day in '89 with the Cowboys. Now they're worth at $9 billion.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is doing fine.
I think he's doing quite fine. So,
he's doing just fine.
So as we talk about all these numbers, like this is a just cleaning house. What do you guys think? Like, is this just, a big step in the right direction for the company as we head into 2024?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you're taking that burn off. You're taking that heavy burn off the balance sheet on a quarterly basis. I mean, that'll free up. It should make the numbers look much more attractive quarter over quarter going into the future now.
I guess the better question is, are you believing more and more long term with some of these transactions that Canopy is doing, segue into 2024?
I believe long term. I mean, I said I've got 2025 calls in the name. So, I'm hoping for 2024 to be a transitional year for Canopy. And I mean, this adds to my thesis.
Yeah. Ben, what do you think?
I think it's an important step in the restructuring process to reduce that burn. But you don't have to confuse that with growing operations in other parts. So it's just one part of the restructuring process that is very successful in that regard. In terms of, is the business viable long-term? That's a different question, but no doubt that this had to happen to get this burn off the balance sheet. This is a big cash sink that is now eliminated.
Yeah, this is Into the Wire section, our segment here on the TDR Traded Black podcast here at the Benzinga Television Network, where we basically update all the biggest headlines in the cannabis space this week. Let's move now to Florida, Ben, and some interesting feedback that could be bold for adult use cannabis potentially passing for the state in the future. The Florida Supreme Court appeared not to buy Attorney General Ashley Moody's challenge to the recreational marijuana amendment, which again was an eye-opener. So bring this, I guess, all together. How do you think Floridians should read into this when it comes to legalizing adult use cannabis in the state in the future?
Yeah, I think it's actually very positive. We heard rumblings soon after the hearing happened that it looked good. People who attended the proceedings, Brady Cobb reported on it, for example, and he thought, things went well. and Kim Rivers, I believe, mentioned that as well. And then it came out in the public realm that a couple justices, looked it over. For example, here's a quote. It says, there's a quote basically saying that I don't know how a voter can be confused by that. I'm baffled by the argument. And that's referring to Ashley Moody's argument about the federal cannabis prohibition within the confusion in the text. So a couple justices came out and they're very dumbfounded by why this was being brought to them. And of course, there's 7 justices on the Florida Supreme Court, so that's only 2 of them. But it's a very good anecdote that perhaps the majority of justices will go along with that line of thinking, and that the ballot will pass whenever they submit their ruling.
Big step.
I thought this was crazy. Yeah, I thought this was crazy. I mean, I thought Ashley Moody's argument, with all due respect, was she was calling people stupid. I mean, the fact that her argument was, yeah, you're going to legalize it for adult use in the state, but they're not legal. But the consumers are not going to understand that it's legal on that it's not legal on a national level is the reason why we shouldn't have adult use. Like, I love seeing all of the Supreme Court justices basically be like, "What are you talking about, ma'am?"
Yeah,
like, if you're going to bring an argument, at least bring something solid. Also, Ben touching on not Ben Smith, Ben Kaler. Canopy USA, I mean, that was a snag. They got a letter from the SEC actually saying that the structure that they're proposing to deploy and actually ring fence Canopy USA and consolidate is not up to par with what the SEC would like to see. I'm going to dig a lot more into that, and we'll cover it in detail on Monday.
Okay, good stuff.
That news is breaking now?
No, that came out this afternoon. I mean, I had a ton of notes to read on my plane back from, actually came out yesterday. I had a bunch of notes to read on the plane on the way here, and they had no Wi-Fi. So I basically had botched time sitting on the plane. But yeah, Canopy USA is something that I definitely want to dive into and get a firm understanding as to why the SEC is objecting to the current proposed structure.
Mike Sr., appreciate the feedback. We do this podcast for people like yourselves, so always leave comments below. Give us your feedback. Happy to discuss any topics that you guys want to discuss. Kind of open mic night as we wrap up basically our headlines. But going back to that Florida Supreme Court feedback pertaining to Ashley Moody this week, this is an attorney general that's pretty smart and sophisticated, but the approach in all this, as you guys said, was pretty ridiculous. What do you think, her agenda?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, here's the thing. The social acceptance and the momentum that the cannabis industry has, the proponents are being forced to grasp at straws. I'm not hearing, and obviously I'm biased as I'm very levered to this industry in more ways than one.
Yeah.
However, there is not a sound argument out there as to why adult use cannabis should not be legalized and why cannabis should not be rescheduled. The proponents, Kevin Sabet, AGs on the state level, Sam, different organizations that are out there, if they want to come with a fact-based argument against the legalization and descheduling of cannabis, I welcome it.
Yeah.
But just like what we're seeing with Ashley Moody, just like what we're seeing with Kevin Sabet, there are no concrete arguments against any of this. It's all just stigma-based and opinion and conjecture. And until then, I don't think anyone's going to make a sound argument against it.
Yeah. How many people on Twitter are blocked by Kevin, and then Ashley Moody doesn't even show up? So if there are some points to your point, just let's hear it. Let's have a conversation.
Well, the problem is, like anything, like statistics can be bent to whichever direction, whatever your bias is. Like, there are some studies that you can point to say that increases the THC, increases the risk of heart attacks, for example, for smokers. But I mean, it's, is it worth prohibiting? I'm just saying it's out there. I'm just saying it's a small.
Correct. Increase. But me eating red meat boosts the risk of heart disease.
Yeah.
Me eating red meat every day would, but from the medical definition, would increase my risk of heart disease.
And that was exactly what I was going to say for rebuttal. You could say the same thing about refined white sugar. You can say the same thing about alcohol, which has a higher incidence of disorders in terms of dependence. You could say something about anything, right? So the opponents will use those select studies that will say, it increases the risk of this, but in comparison to other things that, especially alcohol, but even like everyday items like refined sugar, meat, it's probably not problematic, and it shouldn't be prohibited from use from the wider population that it gives a lot of joy and also medical benefits from.
No, I mean, cannabis, it does raise your blood pressure, like when you consume it, but a ton of other stuff does as well.
One thing I've learned though this week, common sense is not the end all and be all when it comes to this stuff. And what I mean by that is there's just so much more to a simple story than what people think. And just when you think something can go simplified, a law can be basically passed. There's so many moving parts to everything and every decision that's made. And I guess that's the challenging part. But to your guys' point, let's hear the dialogue from the other side. But from what I see, speaking to lobbyists, hedge funds, a lot of institutions, and a lot of executives this week, the train has left the station. We are at a turning point. I think 2024 will be a very, very promising year. But again, we need to walk before we run and make sure we take the right necessary steps for long-term longevity for this industry. Otherwise, you're running into the same situation as to what happened in Canada, where things could implode real fast if it's not built in the right way.
Yeah.
One thing I want to point out too is that this was a cannabis and a psychedelic conference that we attended. And as much as we talk a lot about cannabis, we want to talk a lot about psychedelics. There's really not a lot to talk about right now, but there was a lot of interest from institutions regarding the psychedelic space while we were there. I don't know if you had that feedback, Anthony, but a lot of interest and questions that pertain to that industry as well.
There was, I'd be lying if I said I had any of those conversations. My 99% of my conversations were cannabis focused.
Yeah.
That were there. I mean, I know that we talked to one family office that was looking at psychedelics. And I mean, the general consensus in this space right now is really the only company that's public that's interesting is Cybin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're executing, they've got data, they've got their capital raise out of the way. I mean, they're really the only thing that's capturing people's attention in the psychedelic space.
Clearly, what the sentiment I got is that these companies just went public way too soon and are running into issues that they're still private. They'd be in a lot more lucrative position. Saying that, do you guys believe that if there's some sort of legalization towards MDMA, MAPS' protocol, MDMA being legalized next year, that we could see more companies go public? Or do you think that at the end, we only see 1, 2, maybe 3 companies in this space?
I think my big question is why hasn't MAPS closed their Series A, which was announced in the Wall Street Journal in late June? Okay, so we had the great data that was supplied in early September, and it is now mid-November, and still they haven't closed the capital raise. So all that momentum that they had from those numbers wasn't enough to get the investment pool to buy in yet. So my personal question is why? Like, what is stopping that? Why was taking?
Do you guys not believe it's macro events? Because when you have data that strong, that was what, the 2nd or 3rd week of September, and since then there's been like nothing, no news.
I'm gonna
guess
guess
end of the first week.
This is pure speculation here, but I'm going to guess that whatever trials that they did, and the fact that it's a protocol and not a drug, whatever it is that institutional investors have to go off of and look at, it might not be all that defensible. Also, Ben's nailed it on the head several times on the podcast that in a high rate environment, raising money for biotechs,
good point,
is very difficult. And they might be getting beat up on valuation.
It also could be just throwing out speculation, could be a patent thing. Because their patent only lasts like 5 years, something like that. It could also be, the phase 3 and there's trials. They didn't have like a ton of patients. Granted, it was 2 separate tranches of data, so it looked positive. But maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something behind the scenes. All I know is that the momentum was there. They could have capitalized, and they haven't yet. So I'm sort of looking at why. Why haven't they done that yet?
Ben, we're actually speaking on the live stream on Monday with John Levine from MariMed. So we will send us some, leave some comments below and outline some questions that you want us to ask John. But he will be joining the live stream at 4:10 on Monday with us, which will be really, really good because I know a lot of you have been reaching out, want to know what's going on. I think some people were just questioning some of the latest earnings and probably some important questions that need to be asked, and fair enough. But yeah, going back to psychedelics, like the only real announcement, I guess, that was made this week is Cybin mentioned that they're going to be announcing later this month on the 30th, if I'm correct, that they will be announcing their latest data settings. So we've been watching that closely.
That was interesting to see as well.
Yeah.
That was interesting to see as well. I couldn't say that I like that too much, that they're pre-announcing. Just
Why?
Press release game. I mean, they don't need to pre-announce data. They've all eyes in the psychedelic sector on Cybin.
Yeah.
All they got to do is drop the release on the 30th and they'll be fine.
Cybin likes to keep a robust news cycle. If you've been following the company for a long time, they press release a lot, which something be said for keeping it, investors in the know.
Yeah.
Emails writes to you, Anthony. I know about the CGC calls. Any MSOs calls that you like or too illiquid?
There's none that I like in terms of advice. So I'm holding MSOS January 19th, $9 calls. That's what I have personally. Not saying go out and buy them or I have any opinion either which way. But that's how I'm playing MSOS.
Marcus Smith, always good to hear you. Love the support. Ron DeSantis would be better off going pro-cannabis and be a Republican standout. He'd do a lot better in the polls. Guys agree with that?
I don't buy. I don't think Ron DeSantis is going to be able to do anything to help himself in the polls.
Agreed. And
unfortunately, I don't buy the argument that Ron DeSantis is not pro-cannabis. Again, I will say this until the cows come home. Florida has become the strongest medical market in the United States under Ron DeSantis.
Yep.
End stop. That's fact.
Okay, so
look, there's nothing that's going to, without getting too far into this, there's nothing that's going to derail Trump if he's allowed to run. He's so far ahead of all the Republican candidates. A subject like cannabis, even if he moves that direction, is not going to tip the balances. Like Republicans or a large portion of the base is all in on Trump. They don't care about if he gets convicted. They don't care about all the, whatever, all the extraneous stuff in the background trying to derail his campaign. So nothing like that's going to help DeSantis in this cycle. In fact, if I was DeSantis, if I was in his political team, I would advise him to not run in this particular cycle. I think he has a chance in the future, maybe 2028, 2032, but I wouldn't run if I was DeSantis.
He's just not, as much as I like Ron, and I like Ron a lot, he's just not likable on a national stage.
At all. He's awkward.
He just,
and these three GOP debates, it has worked so perfectly for Trump because you look at what Nikki Haley announced this week. DeSantis is like, I hate to say it, but he's almost like Trump's little brother. He's not gonna beat Donald Trump. Chris Christie, just go away. Just go for a walk. Literally go for a walk. And
I said this at the beginning of the year. DeSantis should not have run for the nominee. DeSantis should have taken his medicine, be Trump's VP. Trump's probably going to win the election, whether we want him to or not.
And in
2024,
years, the United States.
And then whoever Trump's VP is, they are going to walk into the Oval Office because the MAGA crowd is going to have they're going to have no other option but to support whoever Donald supports because Donald's done after his next term.
Trump is actually polling, if you look at some polls, sorry, we're getting maybe too far off here, but with Hispanics, right? This is like generally 25% territory for Republicans. He's polling about 50. He's polling about par, 45 to 50% with Hispanics. A lot of people are just kind of sick of the regime that's in the White House right now, and they're going all in on Trump.
Do you
Hispanics understand?
Has his numbers gone up from before the first GOP debate began?
Somewhat, yeah. What it is now? That is a good question. I'm not sure.
Well, I know a lot of people may say this is might think I'm crazy, but I think a great vice president for Donald Trump would be Vivek. I think he's got a lot of great stuff that understands. The guy's traveled the world, but it's just a matter of, does America really want to go through a lot of that stuff? But I think it's necessary. A lot of the stuff that he does bring up, his opening segment in that debate too was incredible.
Yeah. Also, getting back to cannabis, Brady, Sunburn, congratulations. They're hitting their highest metrics as of this week. They're actually number 2 in milligrams sold per store in the state of Florida, and number 4 in ounces sold per store in the state of Florida. So I mean, they're kicking ass, and they're proving that brands do work, and I would be willing to bet that they're going to continue to see results in growing metrics in the state of Florida.
Yeah. We actually had a really good time with Nicholas Vita. What'd you think of that? We asked just some good questions pertaining to the latest earnings, but he answered them. But what was your big takeaway with everything he said about the share buyback and or share? What was it called again? Sorry, apologies.
The share repurchase program. They've got a $15 million share repurchase program that was put in place to potentially scoop up any share blocks that come out of that fund, and they have the option to repurchase any of their shares. To be honest, what struck me most is that from the time Nick sat down, he thanked every single person that walked in and that walked out that were a customer.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Nick. I mean,
If
we talked
New York
for like 2 hours.
If New York ever gets it right, what a location downtown Brooklyn that they have, like a block away from the Barclays Center, and
they've got the application.
So many people came to the door. They're still trying to understand that it's a medical dispensary, and but there's a lot of people that was a steady flow of traffic, and that was a midday on a Wednesday. But getting back to like some of the questions that people really wanted to ask, the gross profit margin, which he outlined, which related to a lot of it was Cresco. But I think most importantly, he said the right things, but he's got a quarter to obviously, prove himself that a lot of investors are going to want to see. But most importantly, I think we asked some really good questions that pertain to the earnings that people got, I think, some good answers out. And if you haven't seen that podcast yet, then just go to our Traded Black podcast and check out the date, which was November the 15th on that. And you'll see all the information. Chadwick wrote in a comment, hey, are you guys buyers of Canopy Growth, CGC? Real quick, this is not investment advice. Reminder, I am not a buyer of Canopy Growth right now.
I'm not buying, but I bought calls last week. I'll stay in those calls. They're over in 2025. I would toe in if that's what you think is necessary, but yeah, I've got really no opinion on that. I do have exposure to Canopy, though.
Yeah, can't really. We're not in that business of swaying people one way or another, but just give you information. I was busy this week, but I just can't see Trump winning after everything that's coming out, said Marcus Smith. I don't know. Was there more information that came out this week that I might have missed? Do you guys know?
I'm assuming he's talking to the several. I'm assuming he's talking to the several lawsuits, and God knows how many states now that Trump's facing, and just the general circus that's around the Donald.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I'm just going to real quick. That concludes obviously the Into the Wire first segment, headlining all the biggest announcement this week in cannabis and psychedelics. We're going to now switch to segment number 2 here, the TDR Traded Black podcast here on the Benzinga Television Network, which is Daily Movers. And I think we're going to take a step back. We're not really looking at any specific companies, but I was going to actually bring up just the overall industry as a whole. But Ben, you actually are looking right now at the initial jobless claim report, which is a key economic indicator. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, it provides insights into the health of the labor market, and obviously, with the economy, when that pulls back, then that means there could be economic distress in upcoming. And right now, growth looks still pretty good. It's very, very resilient overall, but at some point, it's probably going to crack. The lagging effect of higher rates is probably going to take an effect at some point. Whether we get into recession in 2024 or whatnot, 2025, who knows? But it just, little indicators like that in a short week. Thanksgiving's coming up, and just to sort of set the tone for the end of the week and the beginning of next week.
Duly noted. As I said off the top, we don't want to look at any specific stocks, but let's look at this industry as a whole and how it performed this week, which appeared to be relatively flat. We've now finished for the majority earnings season. We have a short trading week next week, knowing that Thanksgiving is scheduled for next Thursday, which is November the 23rd at the time of this podcast. But I'll ask both of you as the big takeaways as we close out this podcast here today. What's your take on the health of the industry right now from an investor standpoint, knowing that, we've finished the latest earnings season? Start with you, Ben.
Yeah, I thought everything was pretty good. Again, no real outliers or negative surprises. I thought for the most part, the companies hit their numbers, which is nice. And then to end the week, sort of a flat day on the broad market, and MSOs rallied and finished right near the week's highs at 690, and that
Yeah.
was sort of the bottom base of the consolidation where it broke down from previous support, and now it's bumping into what looks like resistance. So I think that's a good sign because you had the earnings come out, and companies like Air, for example, didn't provide the best guidance because they took a hit on some of their Florida operations, and that was down 10-11%, and then today it was up 9-10%. It got most of that back.
Yeah.
So just little things like that you can watch that show that people that any sort of negative news is just being bought back up because there are bigger things on the horizon, like rescheduling potentially with DEA, safer, and all that kind of stuff that we've been talking about. So it's a very good dynamic that we're in right now. Instead of just selling everything and then it stays down, now the dips are being bought. So that was my big takeaway.
Anthony?
I'm looking at names that I've been looking at for a while after this earnings season. I mean, there were some that I liked their earnings reports. There were others that left some stuff to be determined.
Yep.
But I mean, Ben's right. I mean, MSOS is finishing the week around the high. This is a point of resistance. I just see a ton of positive sentiment everywhere. And for everybody that was watching or on Twitter yesterday, I know that I mocked the Snoop Dogg
I forgot to ask you that off the top.
I'm not quitting investing in cannabis. That was complete satire. Like, there were a lot of people that were like, oh, really? Like, sad to see you go. I was like, no, this is satirical. It did its job. It got its engagement. I'm not fucking leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying investing in the cannabis.
There was one stretch where after the conference, we were walking around in Manhattan for about 15 blocks, and he's just bringing up his phone. He's just like, man, these guys think I'm actually serious. But yeah, way to get the emotions involved on the Twitterverse or Twitter space. Yeah. That's hilarious.
But no, I mean, there's bullish action here. I mean, there's a lot of names that are showing a lot of signs of life. And I mean, there were a couple things in the MJUS ETF this week that got that there's some changes in there that I don't know if I agree with. That surprised me. But I mean, that tape looks healthy.
We did actually hear one.
There's not tax loss, so we don't have to worry about that. That's usually reserved for stocks and for sectors where price action is down a material amount, so they can deflect some of their losses off their gains to reduce the tax burden. And we don't have that this year. MSOs is around flat on the year. So, and the components you can extrapolate are around flat. Most of them, generally speaking, are within a narrow range. So that's good. It's good. We don't have to worry about that aspect this year.
Yeah. Legalization on recreational in Germany as well. We spoke to two people from Germany while we were there, and they said it is indeed going to happen in Q1. So,
although it got delayed, did it not? I believe the news came out. They might be pushing back the timelines.
So I was talking to this gentleman and I brought that up. He was like, it's getting passed. I was like, are you German? Are you actually there? Because we get this. We've been getting the runaround from the German government for years now. He was like, it's passing this time around. He was quite adamant and quite confident. And I threw everything I had at him as far as an argument against it, just because of the runaround that we've all experienced.
So when would the effect date go into effect?
That to be determined, but he said the vote's getting done by the end of the year.
Yeah. When will New York Tier 1 MSOs come online? Good question.
The applications are in. For instance, the Cannabis has the application in for their dispensary to co-locate med and rec in a preferred location. I would assume that the other top tier MSOs that have exposure to the New York market also have those applications in and are awaiting a decision from the OCM.
Yeah. Marcus, yes, it got delayed in Germany to next year, but to our point is that the people that we'd spoke to this week from Germany said he was pretty adamant that it's going to happen in Q1 of 2024. So, all right, that pretty much wraps up. I need to get some sleep. I'm tripping over my words here today, but it was a good 3-4 days, but I am ready for a nap. But just recapping today's podcast, Canopy receives approval from the Ontario Court Justice to sell all BioSteel assets. The Florida Supreme Court did not buy Attorney General Ashley Moody's challenge to the recreational marijuana amendment, saying it does not immunize violations of federal law. DEA announcement concerning rescheduling. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say when it's going to happen. I think a lot of people are thinking it's imminent and it could happen within the next couple of days or weeks. But the feedback that we got from some pretty prominent people is that they think it's not going to be until Q1, end of Q1 next year. But they could be wrong. Nobody really knows. But that was a lot of the sentiment we heard from some pretty influential people. And finally, cannabis stocks flat for the week. But all in all, some positive sentiment building in this space, which is encouraging.
And just to note, on the week, Air's up 28% and Cresco's up 22%.
Yeah.
Those are notable names.
What'd you guys think of Cresco's report? We didn't touch on that, did we?
I mean, there was about a 10% drop off in top line, but I mean, all the other metrics I did like.
Okay. David Gobert, we've reached out to the Air team. We're hoping to have him on next week as well. It's a short week, but we are in dialogue with them. And then as well, interesting podcast we're going to have on Monday. We have John Levine on. And in addition to John Levine, because it's a short week, we're going to have two guests on. We're also going to have John Hartman from Ascend Wellness, which I think would be a nice conversation to have because they posted some pretty strong earnings, to say the least.
Yeah, one of the better earnings reports out there.
Yeah,
Ascend was one of the better earnings reports.
So
I'm actually excited. I'm excited to talk to them.
Cybin and Ascend on, or should say Cybin. Cybin hopefully on Wednesday with Doug Drysdale, but Ascend and MaryMed on Monday. And then hopefully we can get Air Wellness and Cybin on with Doug Drysdale on Wednesday.
And then, Emails is right. MJUS was attributing to a lot of the buying in Air and Cresco.
Yeah. All right, gents. Listen, I appreciate Ben. Way to hold the fort down once again. Anthony, good seeing you. And get some sleep because we're back on a plane across the country another week and a half for MJ Biz in Vegas, which should be more encouraging as we get more information. And again, we're going to be broadcasting or doing a podcast at Planet 13's dispensary.
Oh,
I know you're going to go there. I was going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
You want to go there, don't you?
You brought them up.
Why, you don't want to go there, Shad?
Go ahead. And then I'm going to bed. Go ahead.
Did they get FTX'd?
I saw your text briefly when I got off the flight. Something about $21 million. So break it down.
I saw the headline that the company that was responsible for their cash management basically lost $21.5 million.
Oof.
Was there a regional bank or something that went under?
I gotta just like Canopy USA. I mean, I gotta read more into it. I was literally taking off when I sent you guys that headline. But yes, from my understanding, there's a $21.5 million gap in the cash position that Planet 13 currently has.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be some clarity on that in the coming days. I'm going to read a lot more into it and read into the financial institution that was warehousing their money. But the more that I thought about it, if there is that $21.5 million gap, I mean, that reverberates. That completely messes up their cash flow cycle. That goes to their distributors. Goes to their tax implications. Yeah.
That's a good good first question to start a conversation with him in Vegas, right?
I'm hoping the doors are open when we get there, which they will be. They will be. That was a joke. They'll be fine.
You want to take that back? Mitch, can you edit that part out?
But yes, it was not a good headline to say the least. We keep taking it on the chin.
Mitch
but
is in...
you know how.
Okay, so what happened? Just a little bit more color. One of their custodians, or not custodians, but the groups that did their cash management, their money was held at Bridge Bank, a division of Western Alliance Bank, and something happened there. So
I threw up the press release there in the chat for you guys. If you guys want to look into a little deeper, I know all our investors out there will be watching this. So there's the link if you guys want to check out the press release.
And you know how this could have been avoided? If cannabis companies could use large money center banks.
Yeah.
And safe banking was actually
Well
implemented
said.
and passed.
Well
Yeah.
said.
So
On that,
I don't want to make excuses. I hope the Planet 13 comes out of this on the positive end. I'm sure there was some insurance involved, but yes, at face value, it is not a good headline to stomach.
yeah, that is a good way of ending this podcast. A good point about safe banking. Ben, Anthony, enjoy the weekend, and we'll get back up next week for a short week. You're off to Colorado on Tuesday. See you guys later.
I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel because